I had got some beads. I had strung my own beads. But I didn't have Tulsi beads. They had some other beads. Gargamuni, who ran the store, ran out of Tulsi beads. There were so many people getting initiated. There was these other beads, and they were kind of dark red wood. They were blackish dark red wood. And I had very proudly strung them on this orange cord, and they were very nice beads, I thought. On my initiation night, I came, the moment of truth came when you would come up and you'd give Prabhupada your beads. And in those days, it was a very personal thing. He would he would be sitting there before the fire, and you'd give him the beads, and he would sit there and he would chant a whole round right there in front of you. So I came up and I gave Prabhupada my beads, and he looked at the beads and he says, "Oh, Rudraksha. We don't chant on Rudraksha. Rudraksha is like the Shiva beads that Shivites have." And I said, "No, Prabhupada, they're not Rudraksha." This sudden feeling of being rejected. Oh no, I'm right at the brink of becoming his disciple, and now my beads are being rejected. So I said, "No, Prabhupada, they're not Rudraksha." And he looked at him again closer, and he could see, oh, they weren't Rudraksha, they weren't Tulsi beads. And he said, "How come you don't have Tulsi beads?" And I said, "Oh, Gargamuni ran out of Tulsi beads." And he said, "Well, this is all right." So he kind of took them, and he chanted on them. And
the very first instruction he gave it to me was not after initiation, but when we arrived from Bombay on a train, and then we reached Radha Damodar temple by Tonga. It was early morning, and we entered into Prabhupada's quarters, small, tiny room, about maybe 15 of us, and I was sitting just in front of Prabhupada, and Prabhupada was speaking, and we were all listening. And I had one habit of, when I arise to hear someone with attention, I had a tendency to do like that. Some people do that. I was sitting in front of Prabhupada doing that, and Prabhupada said, "Stop it!" So that was in fact my first meeting, personal meeting, and first instruction that yes.
Well, we were always anxious to get some mercy from Šrila Prabhupada in the form of his belongings, something that we could hold on to. And I also would do this very often as his servant. I would try to get something from Šrila Prabhupada. And the very first opportunity I had that I remember was when I had gotten Brahmin initiation, which again was in Los Angeles in 1972. I had my Brahmin thread, I think all of maybe 1 month, and this was the thread, of course, that Prabhupada had chanted on. And in New Vrindavan, when we used to go bathe, you would have to go outside, and there was a little stream that was dammed up, and you would grab water and throw it over your body. It was quite nice, quite cold. But depending on the position of the moon, whether it was new moon or full moon, it could be very dark at 4 o'clock in the morning. So one morning I remember going and bathing, going to the brook there and throwing buckets of semi-mud and water over my head to bathe in the morning in New Vrindavan. And when I got back to my quarters, my Brahmin thread was gone. I went to Chenkahatri and my thread was gone. Because I was very young and very much attached to it, and I was totally devastated that now, that link had shattered. That link was gone. I thought, this is definitely a very bad omen. Something's not good here. And I had, of course, then we didn't have Brahmin threads from India neither. You just you got some string and you tied it in a knot. You would get six of them, and that was your Brahmin thread. So that's what I had to do to continue chanting my Gayatri, and I did it. But I was never content. I always felt that I needed that. And of course, even there now I had become his servant, for some reason, there was no question of asking him, would you chant on a thread for me? But I devised a plan. After being with him for a month, he told me that whenever Ekadasi was there, that he would change his Brahmin thread on Ekadasi. And he said, so at this time, he said, you can put the thread on the table. And So I was all prepared. I said, well, now I will get Prabhupada's old Brahmin thread because he's going to take it off and place it on the table. And Prabhupada was bathing, so I set up this table, put the tilak out, the mirror out, and I put a nice Brahmin thread and laid it right on the table, which today was Ekadasi. And I watched, this was in Radha Damodar temple, where Prabhupada was staying in the room downstairs. And I was on the veranda right outside, and I was just sitting there watching and waiting. I was so happy. Now I was going to get my Brahmin thread back. And Prabhupada put on his tilak and put the second thread around and began chanting Gayatri. So now I was busy in the kitchen with Jamuna, helping getting his lunch together. And Prabhupada chanted Gayatri. And then he left his quarters and he walked by the veranda into the kitchen to take prasadam. And I raced into the room and I found this Brahmin thread, and he had broken every thread, all 6 of them. He broke them all. And I thought, why did he do this? And I immediately started thinking he must know something. He must have done this because I wanted his thread. Of course, I was very stubborn. So I grabbed each thread and I tied it in a little knot. All 6 of them. I thought, now I have my Brahmin thread. He said, despite everything, I still have it. Prabhupada's chanted on it, I thought, so many times, so it's better than my original Brahmin thread. So I took the Brahmin thread and put it in my pocket. And then I went in where Prabhupada was taking prasadam. And he said, so that Brahmin thread that I've left on the table? I said, yes, Srila Prabhupada. He said, so you should take that Brahmin thread and dig under Tulsi Devi and bury it under a Tulsi plant. I thought, no, this is impossible. Like, is this what they do, or is he just doing this to me? And I said, okay, Srila Prabhupada. Of course, I didn't obey that order because I was so determined. It was one order Srila Prabhupada gave that I just reneged on because I thought I have to have this Brahmin thread. So I took it and disobeyed his instruction. But that was the beginning of many different opportunities I had to get a piece of Maha Prasadam in the form of cloth from Srila Prabhupada.
I remember one time he cooked for his spiritual master's appearance or disappearance day on the La Cienega temple here. And he cooked a pot of khichdi, which he said was his spiritual master's favorite dish. And it is a wonderful dish. And he cooked it using urdal, which is not just a split urdal, but the polished urdal. So it came out with a very creamy consistency. And he made a pot about this size, about half full, and there were 30 of us in that room. And there are many other dishes too. So we started out by tasting the prasadam that Prabhupada had cooked, and everyone was in a jolly mood because it was a holiday, and we were observing the appearance or disappearance. I think it was the appearance day of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. And that picture of Prabhupada cooking at the stove is that occasion when he was cooking that khichdi. It's a famous picture. And we came out and everybody got a dab of khichdi on their plate. And by that time it was cold. And I think Prabhupada wasn't there. He had already gone to his quarters to do things. And everybody was in a jolly mood. We were all talking and chatting. And we all reached over with our fingers, because in those days we ate with our fingers. And we picked up the khichdi and we popped it in our mouths. And all of a sudden this conversation died out everywhere. It was not this was not some external ceremony that we were honoring this prasadam. We were not in the mood to honor anything. We were having a good time and chatting and jolly. As soon as that prasadam touched our tongues, we fell silent. We sat there in dead, icy, ice cave silence, tasting grain after grain of it until it was all gone, and then we searched for stray grains on our plates. And then everybody in the room, by common mutual consent, began crawling on their all fours towards the pot in the middle of the room where there was still a little bit left. And we all reached in simultaneously, and we were taking little pieces out of the pot. Our eyes were staring straight ahead. No one spoke a word until there was nothing left. Then we all went back and sat down and sat there in silence for almost an hour. Something about that prasadam was so charged with what must have been something like Gopi Bhava. It was too much ecstasy involved in that prasadam that we were struck by it. every feeling, the exquisite, excruciating feeling that Prabhupada feels for his spiritual master was present, and we had a chance. And then we realized that Prabhupada had given that to us like an extra special little present or benediction, that he'd allowed us to open the door a little bit and peek at what his world was like.
He would say, and your name is Madhudvisa. And when he said Madhudvisa, have you ever heard Prabhupada say your name, you never forget it. The way he says it, because it becomes genuine when he says it, Madhudvisa. And everybody says, wow, Madhudvisa, what does that mean? Who is that? And what is that? And what did he say? And you forget your name right away, although you heard him clearly say it, you forget it. So later on you have Upendra or one of the servants ask Prabhupada, what does his name mean? And, this and that. So I asked Prabhupada, what the name means, and he broke it down. Dvisha means to be envious, D-V-I-S-A, Dvisha, to be envious. And Madhu, as you know, is the great demon. So Madhudvisha means one who is envious of Madhu. And I said, Prabhupada, how can Krishna be envious of anyone? And Prabhupada said, no, Krishna can be envious too. Madhu was such a great demon that he became envious of him and cut his head off, annihilated the Madhu demon. So anything's possible, with Krishna, any emotion. It's in its perfect form.
One morning on Juhu Beach, we were walking, and the birds were flying in the sky. They're flying in a very perfect formation, and they would turn around, all of them together, or one bird going and all other birds flying, one straight line or U-turn, So I asked Prabhupada, how do these birds manage, flying in a perfect formation? How do they communicate with each other? Who's there? And Prabhupada's response was, they are not less intelligent like you are.
The first time Prabhupada gave me a personal assignment was when I was in Los Angeles, and we had just moved into the La Cienega Temple, which was the first church in the history of ISKCON. We had always operated out of storefronts in New York City, and Los Angeles at Pico Boulevard, and San Francisco at Frederick Street. And everybody, it was like storefront. That was the modus operandi of the devotees in those days. Go rent a storefront, and open a temple. So everybody kind of did that. But in La Cienega Boulevard, we had actually rented a church. It was a big, fairly good-sized church. So we were all there, and we were going on Sankirtan. Everything was going on very well. And I was the treasurer, and Tamal Krishna Maharaj was the president. And there was a lot of older devotees there. So we were kind of at loggerheads with each other, myself and Tamal. We were always serving together, but somehow or other we were pulling in different directions at some times. So Šrila Prabhupada called me in and called Tamal in together. And so he said, well, why is there a problem? And Tamal said, well, Madhavisa can do the same things I do. And, we both can do them, but sometimes he wants to do them and sometimes I want to do them, and we get into conflict like this. So Šrila Prabhupada said, well, let Madhavisa go to San Francisco and be the temple president there. So I said, great, this is a breath of fresh air. I'm going to go and become the temple president in San Francisco, the temple that I originally joined at. And that was a special responsibility because that's where our Rath Yatra festival was held. In those days, there was no other Rath Yatra festivals on a grand style. There was maybe some small festivals, but there wasn't even any Rath Yatra festival in Los Angeles in those days. But in San Francisco, that was the new Jagannath Puri, and we had a tradition of a grand Rath Yatra. So when I was sent to San Francisco, that was the first, personal instruction that I was receiving from Srila Prabhupada. I had been serving Prabhupada, but it was always as the group. It wasn't, you know, Prabhupada saying, go there and you know, take responsibility. And he said, make this Ratha Yatra even grander, you know, make it like it is in Jagannath Puri in India. So I went there to San Francisco with that feeling of responsibility.
I got to go to New York, where I got initiation. And of course I was with Kirtanananda, who was, you know, sannyasi. He had a lot of pull. Then I would get to sit right by Srila Prabhupada on his Vyasasana on Henry Street, which was packed. And I don't know if you would have ever been on 439 Henry Street. It was not a very big temple room, and New York was very crowded, and everyone was from all the visiting Columbus Temple, Pittsburgh Temple, New Vrindavan. Devotees from everywhere would come to New York to see Srila Prabhupada. And I got the benefit to go on morning walks because I was with Kirtanananda. I was his servant. And so we'd go on the morning walk. So I was getting some personal association in that way. And I remember one day, this was my first close contact to him, was in the temple room. And what had happened was devotees were just crunched standing there at kirtan, as Prabhupada was having kirtan before class. And then we would all bow down to pay our obeisances, which of course would take up a lot more room when we knelt down. So when I got up, there was a devotee behind me whose head was right at my feet. So I got up, and he got up at the same time and pushed me forward, which I was right beside Srila Prabhupada's Vyasasana, and I just fell like right across his Vyasasana, kind of on him a little bit, and I literally fell onto him. And he just looked over and he said, so what is the difficulty? And I just, like a mouse, I said, nothing, Srila Prabhupada, and I just cowered back into my space there. And then that was stopped from there. But that was my first meeting with Srila Prabhupada, where I made my presence known.
Oh, there was a wonderful story about Prabhupada when we got to the land in Juhu Beach, that there was a family there that was airline pilots, and Prabhupada was going to be staying in their house. And their family name was Acharya. And we were just situating ourselves next door, and Prabhupada, you know, when he was on a morning walk or traveled, he always had this flying wedge of disciples behind him. And he'd be leading, and they would all be sort of swept along in his wake. And we came up to the Acharyas, and they were standing at the top of the stairs. It was a tiny little house, but somehow it seemed very large at the time, and they were all standing at the top of the stairway, beaming and smiling and welcoming Prabhupada, and Prabhupada was coming along, and all of us were there, knowing it was a small house. We were all planning to be the number one to crowd inside and sit down when Prabhupada was there, because he always said some wonderful things as soon as he came into someone's home and sat down. And we all wanted to be witnesses to those wonderful things. So he came up the stairs with his cane and turned in front of the Acharyas. They were standing there, the whole family. He turned and looked grandly over his disciple and said, "Ah," he said, "now I am finally taking shelter of the Acharyas."
Srila Prabhupada was tremendously pleased with the Ratha Yatra festival. And he said this is the process of keeping the devotees, all of the devotees, enlivened, because now Krishna consciousness was kind of spread out a little bit. It was getting far-reaching. There was temples like opening in Seattle, in Vancouver, and places that were kind of spreading the devotees out. So these festivals served as reunions, during the year. So this Ratha Yatra in 1969, devotees were coming from all over, the country, actually. Brahmananda and some devotees came from New York, and there was devotees from Vancouver and Portland. There was a temple then, Los Angeles. So that was like a reunion, and all the devotees would come together, and Srila Prabhupada would come there, and it was a tremendous thing, to have all the devotees serving Srila Prabhupada. Everything was new and everything was special for that engagement. We even down to the buttons on Srila Prabhupada's kurta. I remember one devotee was in charge, and he was stressing that we have to have pearl buttons for Prabhupada's kurta. I'm saying, Prabhupada, why just regular buttons? We can't afford it. And he said, no, we have to have pearl buttons. And so we went and bought the pearl buttons. And it was like, that's how much it was. Everything had to be new, fresh, and perfect. And even though we were still operating out of just a little storefront, it was all painted, everything was clean, everything was spick and span for the festival. And Srila Prabhupada came, to that little storefront for the festival day. And I remember there were so many devotees that, the devotees couldn't get in the front door. Most of the devotees were standing out on the sidewalk.
When Prabhupada gave instruction about the bullock cart was in 76, I think it was month of September, around Radhastami time, when our Nithaya Gaur World Traveling Sankirtan Party had come to Delhi, and around that time we had lost our big buses. They were from Germany and they could only stay for so many months in the country. So around that time they had to go. But I still had a man, because that party was originally Hansudata's party, and so he had returned to Germany for some business, and so I was left behind as in charge of the party. So as we lost the vehicles, then Prabhupada is the one, as he realized that we had no mode of transportation, one day he called me upstairs in his quarters, and what did they say, out of blue, he he said, what about bullock carts? Because he said how these big machines and vehicles, they always break down, and so much maintenance and so much. And I don't know, maybe he knew that I was from a simple village background, so he came up with the idea of bullock cart. And this is how I got this new assignment of traveling in the cart, village to village.
So in the afternoons we would get to go to the Krishna book readings, and fortunately I got to be the designated reader every day. We would sit, and sometimes Prabhupada would sit there and he would make comments during the readings, and sometimes he would just sit very quietly. Sometimes he would laugh. I can remember I would always try to find stories about demons, because more than anything Prabhupada would react. He would usually be laughing. When Krishna was killing the demons, he would get reactions and he would laugh about it. And one day in searching for something, he said, just read from anywhere. He said, Krishna is like a sweet ball. He said, wherever you bite, it's sweet. So then I quickly got to the next page and began reading.
He always was stressing that this was part of our tradition, that Lord Jagannath in all his majesty would go out and take a chariot ride. And it made a very personal thing. Whenever Srila Prabhupada would talk about Krishna, it made it so much more personal. We still didn't have the real personal feeling that standing before the Lord, we could see the Lord and sense that, that feeling and that rapport with him. But Srila Prabhupada would make it personal, that Krishna is coming out. And I remember when Srila Prabhupada arrived at the temple for the day before the festival, he came to the temple and we were making the chariots right across the street in the lot. So Prabhupada went over to the lot. We're all, it was still in disarray and everything. It was a small lot, but there was 3 chariots being built there. And Prabhupada paid his obeisances in front of the chariots. And he looked at me and he said, the chariots are as good as the Lord, And that made it all so much more personal. That here we are, we're building chariots for the Lord, but the chariots themselves were, objects of worship. So it made it, it brought the whole spectrum of Krishna consciousness was there in the Rath Yatra festival. The chariots, the garlands, the prasadam, the instruments, everything, the clothes for the deities. We're all on that same worshipable, level.
In Boston, he began to explain. He said, a devotee may come and may go away again tomorrow. And in those early days, we looked at Srila Prabhupada and ranked disbelief and said, go away? But why would any devotee want to go away? This is it. This is the perfection. This is where you go to after you've done everything else. Why would anyone ever want to leave it? But Prabhupada said, nonetheless, some devotees may go away. So we can't rely simply on word of mouth, because things will happen, things will change, the words will be altered. said, but we all listen to you, Šrila Prabhupada. How will anything ever get altered? We'll always repeat what you say, and therefore it can't possibly get altered. Little did we know, but Prabhupada, having this prescience of knowledge of past, present, and future, was planning for 10,000 years, not simply planning for this week or this month or this year. And we were trapped in our time, having a wonderful time bringing new people into the movement, couldn't see the need. But Back to Godhead began to expand. We brought more and more books on board, and people began to distribute them. But it wasn't until much, much later, years later, that book distribution took off. And then it became self-evident as to why or how so many books could be distributed. And Prabhupada did sanction that people getting them might misuse them. And that was a casualty, or a friendly fire casualty, that we had to absorb, was the possible karmic reaction to giving someone a book and forcing it on them or something, and then they will throw it in the trash. It'll be covered up with old hamburger grease or something. He said we had to accept that that might happen, and this is the risk that we were taking.
Prabhupada always had this really, close feeling with Jayananda, and Jayananda was he was the nuts and bolts man there in San Francisco. You may know that when he first became a devotee, he drove a taxi. Although he was an educated, a man, he had his degree in engineering or something like that from the University of Ohio, but he somehow ended up in San Francisco, and he became a devotee, and he felt the responsibility of going out and driving a taxi and to provide money for the temple. And he was one of the few devotees in the beginning who actually held down a 9-to-5 job. So Jayananda always would take that personal feeling of, if there's something wrong or something broken in the temple, specifically the cars. You could always find them underneath the cars, fixing the cars. And Šrila Prabhupada knew this. He knew that Jayananda was behind the scenes, making it all work. And later on, he would make comments like Jayananda would walk in the room once when Prabhupada was lecturing, and he said, "Oh, the Goswami has arrived." And another occasion, he said, "Jayananda looks just like Lord Chaitanya, big shoulders, big, man." And Jayananda almost blushed his way out of existence when Prabhupada would compliment him like that, because he was naturally so humble.
Kirtananda says he cooks. He said, I've trained him in cooking. He said he cooks very nicely. He said, but he doesn't know how to massage yet. Prabhupada said, anyone can massage. He said, it's not very difficult. And Kirtananda went aside, and Prabhupada said, so he said, follow me. And we went outside, and he said, take the lota. So I grabbed the lota, and I was holding it. And we walked outside about 20, 30 paces, and he said, give me the lota. And I handed him the lota. And he went off into the trees, into the bushes, to pass. So then he came back after a few minutes, and he handed me the lota. He said, here, now wash this. and I became very aware of what my service was as Prabhupada's servant, that, no matter what the menial thing to do, that this is what I did, and I took great pleasure in it. I thought, well, this is great. I'm actually going to be taking care of Prabhupada in whatever little need he had.
The day we wanted to start our Pulakar Sankirtan from Vrindavan to Mayapur, we went to see Šrila Prabhupada. Wanted him to give a little inaugural speech and some further instructions. And because it was winter time, he asked us that we all should have 2 blankets with us. He said our cart should have rubber tires, and not the other kind, the wooden ones. And he said when we go to the village, we should park next to the well. And he gave reason why. Says, so the well is the heart of the village. All people of the village, they come to the well to get the water. So you need not go to them, or they will come to you if you are next to the well. And he said, well meaning water, and water, then you will be suchi, you will also stay clean. So that was his instruction. He also talked how Mahatma Gandhi had kind of failed, because Mahatma Gandhi was trying to keep people in the villages, but how Mahatma Gandhi was stressing on a village industry and whatever is available within the radius of 5 miles, they should just be happy with those resources. Idea was kind of good, Prabhupada said, but he said what lacking was this spirituality which would satisfy their souls, and then they would be happy with the bare minimum facilities. So he gave us a task. The instruction was that you go to the villages and try to increase their attraction for the holy name. And as they have this higher taste for the name of the Lord, then wherever they are, they will stay there. So these were some of his instructions the day we started.
Srila Prabhupada used to travel with a secretary and a cook, and it was like an entourage, a Sanskrit scholar that was working on his books with him. So it was usually 3 or 4 people that would travel with him. But this time he was going to Nairobi, Africa, and it was a short trip. It was only for 2 weeks or so that we were going. So he decided that I would come with him. Just Prabhupada and myself would go. There was no cook, there was no secretary, there was no Sanskrit scholar. I was going to be, everything rolled in one for those 2 weeks. So I thought, wow, this is fantastic, Srila Prabhupada. I was getting a little burnt out with India. I've been to India for a couple of years then, and it was a struggle in those days. So I was wanting to do something else. So Prabhupada took me to Nairobi. And the day, 2-3 days before we were leaving, we got this telegram from Brahmananda in Nairobi saying that the deities had broken. They had sent new deities there, and the deities had broken. So according to Shastra, the deity which is broken is not supposed to be installed in the temple, and that was one of the reasons specifically that Prabhupada was going to install these deities in the temple in Nairobi. So therefore, I had to, frantically go around in Jaipur. We were at Jaipur at that time, and this is where all the deities are made, and marble deities. And we had to frantically travel around Jaipur on a rickshaw for a couple of days, trying to get new deities lined up. So finally, we got new deities lined up, but we couldn't ship them like like on a ship or on a plane or anything like that, because we didn't want to take the chance of them breaking again, and so we personally had to take these deities, and these were big, full-size deities, marble deities, about 3.5 feet tall, 4 feet tall maybe, and they were very heavy. But we took them personally from Jaipur to Bombay. So then when we get on the plane in Bombay, I had to personally carry each deity onto the plane, and we set them in front of us. So Prabhupada had a deity sitting in front of him, and I had a deity sitting in front of me, and we went to Jaipur like that. So it was pretty strenuous, physically strenuous, just to get on the plane. Because Srila Prabhupada walked onto the plane, so I had to go into customs, pick one deity up, walk up the gangplank, onto the plane, put the deity down, and run back, get Krishna, and get Radha, and come up like that. So finally, we got on the plane. And I was a little bit tired. So Prabhupada said, "Oh, so are you ready to fight?" And I said, "Fight, Prabhupada?" "What do you mean?" He said, "We are Vaishnavas, and we must be ready to fight with the Mayavadis." So I said, "Well, yeah, all right." So he said to me, "You be the Mayavadi, and I'll be the Vaishnava. We'll have a fight." So I said, "Oh, Prabhupada, I don't know if I'm qualified to, debate with you like this." He said, "No, you be the Mayavadi." So I said, well, all right. So I was the Mayavadi, and here we are flying up over there. What was it? It's the Indian Ocean there or something? I don't know. What's the ocean that separates Africa from India? Anyways, going east. We're flying over. We finally got settled, and we're up in the air. So Prabhupada's sitting right next to me like that, right like these flowers here, and we're talking to each other, face to face, with the deities, Radha and Krishna, right at our feet, and we're debating. We're fighting. And so I'm a Mayavadi, and I'm not a very good devotee, so I'm not even a very good Mayavadi as far as philosophically being able to, spar with Prabhupada. But anyways, I took the position of the Mayavadi, and he, defeated me, soundly defeated me. So then he said, all right. He said, now he had just defeated me with the Vaishnava, arguments. So he said to me, now I'll be the Mayavadi, and you be the Vaishnava. So I said, all right, now I know all the arguments. There's no way he can defeat me. So we started to fight again, argue again. And he was such an expert that he was able to defeat me as a Vaishnava, and he took the position of a Mayavadi. So I said, and then after the defeat, I was totally mortified, but not really, But I thought that, I know a little bit of Vaishnava philosophy. I should be able to defeat, the Mayavadi arguments. And Prabhupada said to me, he said, this is how expert you must become in your preaching. You must be able to take the position of your opponent and know his position so thoroughly that you can defeat your own philosophy with his philosophy. He said, that's how expert you must become in this preaching of Krishna consciousness.
Another lesson in massage, which was always, as Prabhupada's servant, massaging was the best time, being in such close contact, doing nice service, getting to massage Prabhupada's body, especially his feet, was always made you feel very good. And during massage, in the daytime, Prabhupada would usually go over mail. His secretary would come in, and Prabhupada would hear the letters, and he would give answers for his letters. And while he was doing this, of course, you were massaging him. And when you massage Šrila Prabhupada, you would do, like you would start on his head, and you would just continually massage his head until he said, okay. Or he would just give a gesture with his body, and then you would go to the next spot. So sometimes in this process, if he would be very immersed in something, you could massage a particular part of his body for a very long time. Massage generally lasted about 1 hour, but sometimes it would go 2 hours, 2.5 hours if he was absorbed in his business. And it was, of course, very nice, but it could also become a little bit tiring. And after being with him for some time, I started to feel I knew what I was doing, quite well. So I would massage his head, and when I felt that I was done, completed that point, I had done it sufficiently, I would move on to the next part of his body. And I was doing this for probably 1 week or so. And one day I was massaging, and I remember I was massaging his head, and then I went and I massaged his back, and he didn't say anything, and then I stopped massaging his back, and I started to get up and move around to the side, and he said, you massage until I tell you to stop, not until you tell you to stop. And from that time on, of course, massage had taken a different turn again to whatever Šrila Prabhupada wanted. That's what I would do.
So after flying all that way to Nairobi and being exhausted, we finally arrived at the airport. And now the ordeal of taking the deities off the plane, Radha, first getting Krishna down, all the way down to customs, and then go back up to the plane, and then all the way down, get Radharani back over to customs, and wait in line, move one deity, another deity. So gradually we got through customs, and there we are, standing outside, and there's no devotees. There's not one devotee there at the airport. So we're there, we've got the deities, we've got the luggage. So this one Hindu gentleman came over and said, oh, hey, Bhaktivedanta Swami, you're supposed to arrive tomorrow, you know. And Prabhupada said, oh, they've got it wrong again. How many times we've done this? They've got it wrong again. So he says, oh, I have a car, I'll take you to the temple. So we didn't call the temple naturally, we just jumped in the car and went over to the temple, came to the door, door's locked. All right, so we knock on the door. Prabhupada's there waiting at the door. We knocked on the door. So I still remember it clearly. Brahmananda comes to the door, he opens the door. And there Prabhupada's looking him right in the face. Prabhupada, he goes, oh my God! And he faces the face and says, he's just got a little towel on, you know, no shoes, nothing. In the whole temple, you know, it's the day before Prabhupada arrives, so everything is totally in disarray. The paint is still wet on the banister, the floors are all wet, and, you know, construction is going on. And Prabhupada's there, oh my God, he falls flat in his face. Prabhupada, you're supposed to come tomorrow. Prabhupada, where's my room? Oh, it's not finished, Prabhupada, it's not. Where's my room? Oh, back here. So Prabhupada just walked to his room, and while he was sitting there in his room, everybody was frantically running around trying to make his room a room. It wasn't a room when he walked in, it was just a bare, you know, bare room with no bed, nothing. So Prabhupada got in his room, and everything, you know, everything was gradually came about. The deities were installed. But unfortunately, I had been in India for some time, and I had been taking care of myself, but at the end in Jaipur, I stopped drinking my sugarcane juice. I would drink sugarcane juice all the time, and my blood sugar went down, I think, and I got hepatitis as soon as I arrived in Nairobi. So there I was, my shining hour, you know, to be the secretary, the Sanskrit man, the cook, the masseuse, everything, and I'm laying on my back. I'm useless. The Prabhupada came into my room, and I'm laying there, and I'm trying to struggle to get out of the bed to pay my businesses. And Prabhupada said, no, just stay there, stay there. You know, I'm saying, Prabhupada, I feel so bad. I'm supposed to do all these things for you, and I can't do it. And he says, that's okay. You know, we can manage. You just get your health back. So his compassion was there at every step, too.
One time I wrote to Prabhupada while we were on the way to Mayapur with his bullock carts and kirtan, giving some hints that we needed some financial help to maintain this program, and Prabhupada wrote to me, and he sent a big Sankirtan score, how the big quantity of books are being distributed, and he said, this is how we are maintaining our institution, by book distribution, and you also have to do. And he said outside help is not healthy, and he said if your program is being appreciated by the public, their appreciation has to be practical. That means let them help you, let them assist you, otherwise just a lip service. To that effect, he wrote us in letter and encouraged us to increase book distribution also on the bullock carts and kirtan.
At the end of one Rath Yatra festival, I remember Prabhupada was getting back in his car, you know, and he was putting his feet in the car, so the door was open, and I knelt down, and I held my hands like that to Šrila Prabhupada, and I said, Prabhupada, is everything all right? And Prabhupada took his arm, and he put his arm around my head like that, and put his head right on my lap, and held my head with his hand like that, and he says, everything was first class. And that was probably the most affectionate embrace I've received in my life.
Your head was in his lap?
Yeah, on his lap. He was sitting in the car like that, and I was kneeling beside the car with the door open, and I had my hands like this. You know, I said, Prabhupada, is everything all right? Was everything good? And he took my head, and he put his arm around my back like that, and put my head right on his lap like that, held his arm on top of my head like that, and said, everything was first class.
Of course, Bombay, there were two kinds of cars, basically, that I can remember seeing. One was, I guess it was some old Plymouth blueprints they had, and they produced all these particular cars. I don't remember what they called it. And then there was the Ambassador. So everyone either had this Ambassador or this Plymouth-looking car. And we had gone on a morning walk, and we had one of these Plymouth-looking cars. And it was with myself and Pradyumna and Shyamasundar. And Shyamasundar was driving, and we parked the car, and we got out, and then we were walking along. We had a very nice walk, and some 1 hour and a half later, we walked back to the car, and Shyamasundar trying to get into the car. The doors were unlocked, so we're in, and he's trying to stick the key in the ignition, and this is going on for a few minutes, and he says, the key is not working, the key is not working. And Prabhupada said, so what is wrong? He said, I don't know, I can't get the key to work in the car. So we're sitting there for about 5 minutes, and all of a sudden, two Indian men come up to the car. Now they begin talking to Šrila Prabhupada in Hindi, and talking back and forth, and everything is very friendly. And Prabhupada said, oh, he said, this is not our car. He said, this is their car. And in the meantime, during the conversation, they say, you know, Swamiji, we will take you to where you're going. And so myself and Šrila Prabhupada, we remain in the back seat, and the two gentlemen, they get into the front seat of the car. And he said, so they will take us, he said, to our place. And Shyamasundar and Pradyumna, they went in the other car. So at this point now, after sitting in their car, the men, they decide that they want to take Šrila Prabhupada to his quarters. They don't want it to go, for him to go in his car, so they've convinced him now that they want to do this service because he's a Swami, that we want to take you home. And so we're sitting back there, and Prabhupada said, see, he said, this is the difference, he said. In your country, he said, if we would have been sitting in someone's car, he said, immediately they would have arrested us. He said, but here, you sit in their car and they take you home. He said, they want to take you home.
This social worker came to see Šrila Prabhupada. And he was an old gentleman, but very, very meticulous. He had a very, well-tailored suit on, starched shirt, nice silk tie, spotlessly shined shoes, starched, cuff-linked shirt. Everything was just proper, hair comb, glasses. He was an old gentleman, but Prabhupada started to talk about the sex life. How if a person just wants sex life, then he's like a dog. And this gentleman was saying, well, I like sex life, And Prabhupada said, well, this is a doggish mentality, to just want sex life all the time. Does that mean that you're a dog? And he said, I guess so. That's what I like. So the conversation went on like that. So at the end, the gentleman was soundly defeated by Šrila Prabhupada, but he didn't feel bad. So Prabhupada said to him, prasadam, bring prasadam. So the gentleman said, oh, no, I'm really not eating anything now. He said, no. He says, you must take prasadam. Because Prabhupada knew that this philosophy, although it was defeating him, it really didn't do too much. He did that, the prasadam, he had to take the prasadam. This was the thing that was really going to be able to make this man have a little spiritual advancement in life. Because as far as accepting the philosophy, he had just willfully accepted the fact that he was a dog because he liked sex life. So to philosophically accept this teaching was not going to happen. So Prabhupada was insistent that he take the prasadam. So the devotee brings in a gulab. Now gulab, as we know, is a big, juicy sweet full of sweet ball juice. So the man says, the devotee plopped the gulab in his hand. So it's, if these gulabs were particularly big. They were very big gulabs, and they were soaking in this sugar water for a long time. So the gulab was sitting in his hand, and it was like a sponge. It was like a big sponge. So the gulab, he was talking to Prabhupada, making the final, I'm teaching here, and how long are you going to be here, and maybe we can see each other again. And this, and he had kind of developed a nice, friendly relationship with Prabhupada. They were having their closing remarks, but at the same time, he's kind of trying to balance this gulab in his hand, so it doesn't drip on him. so the gulab starts to, the juice from the gulab starts to run down between his fingers. So he's trying to tilt his hand up while talking to Prabhupada at the same time, so the gulab juice doesn't run down his fingers. But now it starts to run down his wrist, and over his starched shirt sleeve, kind of dripping from the cufflink. So he's kind of holding it like this, doing this balancing act. He doesn't know what to do with this gulab, and Prabhupada says to him, "Eat it." now he's got this gulab, and Prabhupada's saying to eat it, and he's, "Well, no, I don't want to eat it. I can take it with me. I can take it with me." No. Prabhupada said, No. You must eat it now. So the man, he doesn't quite know what to do. So he thinks, well, I'll just take a little bite of this gulab, and it'll be all right. It'll satisfy Prabhupada. So he takes a little bite of this gulab, so it ruptures the gulab, and now all the deluge of sweet ball juice is running out of the gulab. It's running down it's on his tie, and now it's dripping on his shoes, his patent leather shoes, and he's now it's all over the place. So Prabhupada said, no, eat it all, eat it all. So by this time he doesn't care. He's just totally covered with gulab. So he throws it in his mouth. Now he's got this big gulab in his mouth, and the sweet ball juice starts to run down his face. So his hand is full of gulab juice, sugar juice, his cufflinks, his tie, his pants, is dripped on his shoes, and it's coming down his face. But he finishes the gulab, and he smiles. He said, "That's very good." And Prabhupada said, "Yes." And he said, "I'd like to have another one of those." And Prabhupada said, "Oh, very well." And he says, "I think it will go good in my rum." And Prabhupada said, "Wait a second. This is not to put in your rum. This is to eat. This is prasadam. This is food offered to the Lord." He says, No, it tastes sweet. It would go good in my rum. I drink rum every night. I'll just put this gulab in my rum." So Prabhupada calls for another gulab, and he gives it to the gentleman, and the gentleman gets up, and he says, "Thank you very much, Prabhupada, and it was nice meeting you," and everything like that. So he's walking out the door, and Prabhupada said, "Now don't put that in your rum." And the gentleman said, "All right, I'll just eat it." He went out smiling, with all this gulab juice dripped all over him. So it was actually a very hilarious, because I was there, and people who were there couldn't believe what was going on.
When I was 2.5 years in the movement, when I asked Prabhupada, after one evening darshan, when there was no one around, I approached Prabhupada and with the desire of taking sannyas. And he said, "Wait." So I was waiting for 1 year. I didn't talk further. Then, this is in Bombay, I again found Prabhupada by himself one day, and I approached him, and this was in fact the time Sridhar Swami, who was my colleague in Bombay, he was recommended for sannyas. He was asked to go to Vrindavan by Prabhupada, so he was going to get sannyas. So that time I also approached Prabhupada. And when he heard that I wanted to take sannyas, and his first response was, "You are already a sannyasi." And when he saw that I was not satisfied, he started preaching to me the first verse of the 6th chapter in Bhagavad Gita. What is that? No niragnir no chakriyaha. The true yogi is, the whole Prabhupada talked about that verse. It defining sannyas. But then I was not budging an inch. I was keeping some pressure on. And so towards the end he said, "So you want to undergo the formality of sannyas?" And I said, "Yes, Prabhupada." And Prabhupada said, yes, so you go also with Sridhar and meet me there in Vrindavan. So this was December of 75. So we both jumped on the train, and Prabhupada had gone with Ambarish and Hansadutta and Gopal Krishna, other Harikesh Maharaj also, to Kurukshetra, and then he returned, and then courtyard of Krishna Balaram temple, we were given sannyas.
We were once at Šrila Prabhupáda's room, and I walked into the room, and I looked over in the corner, and I saw Prabhupada in a white sari. It was Prabhupada's sister. It looked like Prabhupada, so much like Prabhupada. I had to do a double take, and then Prabhupada walked into the room. There was Prabhupada, and there was Prabhupada's sister, both sitting there in the room together. So they were talking back and forth in Bengali together, and it came time for Prabhupada to take his rest. And his sister is sitting on the floor, and she kind of rolls over, and she starts taking her rest in the room. And I said, Prabhupada, is that all right? And she said, yeah, she won't go away. She's staying here. So she just kind of moved in, and then she started cooking for Prabhupada. So Achyutananda was doing the cooking for Prabhupada, but Prabhupada wanted her to cook these kachoris, because Prabhupada liked kachoris, and she could cook them just the way he liked them. But we weren't used to eating these, kachoris. So the next day at Mangalarti, nobody showed up. It was just, we were just staying in a small rented house. It was a donated house. But we were having our morning program down below, and Prabhupada would come down. And the next morning, after his sister had cooked, nobody showed up for Mangalarti. So Prabhupada called us in afterwards and says, what's the matter? How come no one's here for Mangalarti? And we said, well, your sister cooked these kachoris for us yesterday, and we all ate so many that we couldn't get up in the morning. So then he called his sister in, and he started arguing with his sister in Bengali, back and forth. I couldn't understand. And she was talking, and he was yelling at her, and she was answering back. And then he said to Achyutananda, I says, I'm going to drive this woman out of this house. She's killing all my brahmacharis with those kachoris. So Srila Prabhupada and his sister had, a relationship which was far above, our understanding. But that was just a humorous incident of her being there.
Even sometimes at breakfast, maybe having halava, which was unheard of on a normal basis. But if he was, like I remember in London, Bhaktivedanta Manor, where it was colder, we were there one time when it was cool, and he was requesting heavier foods. But normally, it was that his main meal was at lunch, and then sometimes in the evening, hot milk was very regular in the evening, and sometimes with a puffed rice when that was available, especially in India, they had a nice puffed rice. Sometimes, again, I remember when I was with him early, like in 72 and 73, he would have me make parathas. He showed me how to make paratha, plain paratha, which then I would make it a few times. And he would eat parathas and potatoes in the evening. This could be 9, 10 o'clock in the evening. But that was if he felt that he had the appetite. Without appetite, Prabhupada never forced eating. I remember in Los Angeles, sometimes even he had some popcorn, which was Sankirtan, popcorn that was made in the evening. He had that a few times, he tried. But he liked puffed rice, which was light. And he said, if you eat heavy at night, then it is hard to get up in the morning. So he didn't like to eat heavy in the evening, because it was difficult to digest. Another incident that comes to mind was in 1969. We had this temple in La Cienega Boulevard in Los Angeles. And actually it might have been 1968, anyway, it was 68 or 69. And it was very well attended. The temple was very well attended. The devotees would
go to Griffith Park in Los Angeles and have chanting and prasadam distribution. Vishnu John had little puppets. We have puppet shows there. And we would bring back people from Griffith Park. And also we would go down to Laguna Beach, all the way from Los Angeles to Laguna Beach. There was a store down there, the Mystic Arts bookstore. And they had a meditation room in the back, and they would let us go and have kirtan. So we'd bring, van loads of people from Laguna Beach up to Los Angeles for the feast. So the feasts were very well attended. So on this particular day, there was a fire jagga. People were getting initiated, and Šríla Prabhupáda was there. He was presiding over the jagga himself, as he did in those days. And the temple was very full with people, and there was an Italian filmmaking crew at the temple at that time, and they were filming the whole thing. And if somebody could get hold of that film, it would be a historical piece of footage. But Šríla Prabhupáda was there, and this one lady came, a Hindu lady, came into the temple. And she was a guru to these Hindus. Her name was Shyama Devi. And she ended up having a ashram right next to the Krishna Balaram temple in Vrindavan. But anyways, she came into the temple, and she was sitting in the back of the temple, and they rolled out her carpet, and she sat down on the carpet, and her disciples were older Hindu ladies and gentlemen. They sat around her, and Šríla Prabhupáda was performing the jagga. So Šríla Prabhupáda, after he finished the jagga, he went up and got on the stage. And in those days, we had Prabhupada's Vyasasan seated right on the stage at the same level as the altar. Šríla Prabhupáda was having a kirtan, and he was playing his kartals, and he was leading the kirtan, and then he told someone else to lead. Maybe it was Vishnu Jana or something like that. So in those days, the kirtans were ecstatic, but they weren't uproarious because of the dance step we used to do. We used to do the Swami step, and the Swami step was a choreographed step that everybody would very in coordination with one another dance, put one foot in front of the other, one foot in front of the other. The arms would be upraised like that, and we'd all be chanting and dancing like that. A long aisle of devotees on either side, facing one another, and we dancing back and forth, having kirtan. So Šríla Prabhupáda, during the course of this kirtan, he got up from his Vyasasana, and he was doing the Swami step with us, like that. We were all doing the Swami step. And then Šríla Prabhupáda did something that he had never done before. Nobody had ever experienced this before. Šríla Prabhupáda stopped doing the Swami step, and he started jumping up and down. Jumping up and down. We had never done this jumping up and down. No one ever knew about jumping up and down. We just knew the Swami step, and we were all happy doing the Swami step. But now, Šríla Prabhupáda was jumping up and down. And it was the most amazing thing, because it seemed like the whole universe was rocking. But Šríla Prabhupáda started to jump up and down. So we looked at each other and we said, wow, Prabhupáda's jumping up and down. I guess we can jump up and down too. So it's never been the same since then. Kirtan has never been the same. The Swami step is still there, but it's only done by very conservative devotees. Everybody likes to jump up and down and really get into the uproarious kirtan. So Šríla Prabhupáda was jumping up and down. The devotees were jumping up and down, bouncing off the walls. It was fantastic. So meanwhile, this lady, Shyama Devi, she was there, and she was having kirtan. And one of her disciples opens a bag and gives her a little madanga. So, whoa. In those days, usually there was one madanga per temple. One madanga, and only certain devotees could play that madanga. Those were the devotees who were good madanga players and who wouldn't drop it or put their hand through the end of it. They had to be good madanga players, and they also had to be very concerned that the madanga didn't get damaged, because in those days we didn't have our, American-made plastic madangas. So if a madanga got broken, you'd have to send off to India for it. It took a long time to get it, and we didn't have the import-export thing happening so proficiently in those days. So, but they pulled out a mridanga, little small clay mridanga, coal, and they gave it to her. And she started playing the mridanga. So we kind of stepped aside, and she kind of moved her way up to the front. And Šrila Prabhupada, he's jumping up and down, dancing. And all the devotees are dancing, and she's playing this mridanga. And she starts to dance. And she starts to float around like a butterfly, taking these little small steps. And she's an elderly lady. She's about 50 or 60. She's elderly, but very, very conservative. And she's dancing around like a little butterfly, you know, with her sari over her head, and she's playing the mridanga like a gopi. So all the female devotees now, all right, here was a Vaishnava. She could play the mridanga. She was dancing, and Prabhupada was obviously approving it because he was up there on the stage, jumping up and down. So then Prabhupada jumps off the stage, and he's in with the devotees, amongst the devotees, jumping up and down, chanting Hare Krishna. And this lady, Shamadevi, she's playing the mridanga, and she's dancing. And then the kirtan ends, and then Srila Prabhupada says, now you lead. So she starts to lead the kirtan. Now, the women are really ecstatic. Now, there's another precedent. We can lead kirtans too. We can jump, we can dance, we can play the mridanga, and now we can also lead kirtans, because here, this old lady is doing it, Prabhupada's approving it, he's doing it, he's allowing her to do it. So everybody was in total euphoria there. And she led the most melodious kirtan, and went on and on. Srila Prabhupada was dancing, and she was dancing, and it built up. And it was the most fantastic experience that all the devotees could have had. So, before the dust even settles from the kirtan, the devotee is on the phone to New York. Prabhupada's jumping! Prabhupada's jumping! What do you mean he's jumping? He said, you don't have to do the Swami step anymore. Prabhupada's jumping up and down. The kirtan was going on. Prabhupada was jumping, running up, back and forth, jumping up and down. And Brahmananda was saying, well, how do you do it? How do you jump? He said, you don't have to do it. You just jump up and down. Just be ecstatic. Put your hands up in the air and just jump as high as you can do. So Brahmananda called Boston. Boston called Montreal. And within a matter of hours, the whole country was jumping. And like I said, kirtan has never been the same since that time.
Yeah, after taking sannyas, after the end of the initiation ceremony, myself, Sridhar Maharaj, and Prithuputra, I think he was from France, 3 of us were given sannyas. We went into quarters of Srila Prabhupada to check 2 things, whether our names were going to change and whether new assignments and of course our assignments did not change, and also regarding the names, Prabhupada said just add Swami to your names. So that was one thing. And then he talked to us about Manmanabho Madhavakto Madhyaji Mam Namaskuru, that verse. Said Krishna is asking us to do 4 things, and if we just do these 4 things, remembering Krishna and worshipping and offering him obeisances and becoming his devotee, he said without duplicity, that word duplicitous, then your preaching will be very, very effective, and people will take you very seriously. So that was one instruction in his personal meeting. He gave it to us.
We celebrated Janmashtami in Tokyo, Japan, and that was a very intimate Janmashtami celebration. Srila Prabhupada started the tradition of reading the Krishna book on Janmashtami as much as you could. He said, read the whole Krishna book if you can, but read it constantly throughout the day. So Srila Prabhupada, he wanted us to cook a feast. Now, Dinapan was the printer that was printing our books in those days, so they were courting Prabhupada. So they put him up in a nice house, and they had a chauffeur-driven car and everything come to him. And the temple was in another building. So we all went to Srila Prabhupada's house on Janmashtami day, because he wanted us to cook a big feast for midnight and read the Krishna book during the day. So we sat around and we started reading the Krishna book, and how it took a turn, and Tamal Krishna took a turn, and Kirtananda took a turn. So then Srila Prabhupada said, now is my turn. So he took the Krishna book and he started reading it. And I could see in Srila Prabhupada's eyes, you can see when a person reads something, how if they're really fascinated with something, that you can tell by the manner and the exclamations they make and the feeling that they put into the reading. And Srila Prabhupada was reading very feelingly. And later on, I had talked to Prabhupada, and I said, Prabhupada, you were reading that Krishna book so feelingly. And Prabhupada said, yes. He said, I like to read my Krishna book. It's very entertaining. It's not that just because I wrote it, I don't care about reading it anymore. He said, these are Krishna's pastimes. And it's very ecstatic to read the pastimes of Krishna. So like that, we went on, all day long, reading the Krishna book until midnight. And we didn't finish the whole Krishna book, but we took a pretty good piece out of it.
Once, when Prabhupada blasted me, I remember, this was in Vrindavan during Radha Damodar. This was when he spoke from Nectar of Devotion. He had Nectar of Devotion classes every day, every afternoon in the garden. And at this time I was still only a servant for perhaps 1 month. I was learning a lot still. And when we went into the garden there, I was recording, and there were many flies. They were buzzing about Srila Prabhupada, and he said, but no one was, we were just sitting there, everyone was paying attention to class, and he said, get a fan. So I had come and I had a chamara fan, and Prabhupada was speaking, and I was doing this. I was doing an arati ceremony to Srila Prabhupada. Nothing practical at all. Flies were buzzing around, but instead of just chasing flies, I was there. There were many devotees there, and I was enjoying doing this service. I was Prabhupada's servant. Here I was, turning the whisk around, and the flies were there, and Prabhupada went and like that, and still I was so, enamored by the situation and just so dull-headed that I continued, and I'm going like this. So finally, Srila Prabhupada looked at me, he said, get someone up here with some intelligence. And I mean, of course, there were, could have been 100 devotees there, and I was just, I was so devastated. And so I got down, and who should grab the chamara was this devotee, whose name was Kunja Bahari, who was he was known at the time, this was even back in 1972, he was a very crazy devotee, very peculiar, and he went up there and he started swatting at these flies. So now I'm sitting back about that big by the tape recorder trying to occupy myself like I have something to do so I don't have to pay attention to what just happened to me. And he's swatting at these flies, And I'm looking up at Prabhupada, and Prabhupada looked at him and nodded his head in appreciation, which just further devastated me at the time, like I had failed. Here I am as servant, and I was a total failure. And so the rest of the class went on, and he continued to harass the flies so that they didn't bother our spiritual master. So he was satisfied, and Kunja Bahari was in ecstasy, and I was still trying to deal with my false ego.
And then the next day was Vyasa Puja. So, Kirtananda was a senior disciple. I mean, senior means you were devotee for 2 or 3 years in those days, so it wasn't that we were all so well seasoned, but we should have known how to celebrate Srila Prabhupada's Vyasa Puja. So Srila Prabhupada arrived at the temple about, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, and no, it wasn't 11 o'clock, it was 11:30, like that. And he came and he sat on the Vyasa-san, and he said, where's the Pushpa? Now we were thinking, Pushpa, what is Pushpa? And Sudama was thinking, oh, he wants Pushpa, Pushpa rice, a fancy kind of rice called, what do they call it? Pushpa, There's some kind of rice called pushpa with all these nuts and curd balls and everything like that in it. So he immediately starts making this rice, which delays the process even further. And he said, well, where's the feast? By this time the feast is late. So where's the garlands? We didn't have any garlands. And there was no flowers to do the pushpanjali. So Šrila Prabhupada was sitting on the Vyasasana with a whole temple room full of people. And he said, no pushpanjali. The feast is not ready. You're not saying the right prayers. There's no garlands for the deities. He said, how is this a Vyasa Puja? This is not the Vyasa Puja. He said, this is a disgrace. And he got up and he walked out the door. And we were all devastated. What has to be done? Kirtananda started to cry. Because Prabhupada called him personally. He says, Kirtananda, you are a senior disciple. I mean, you don't know how to celebrate the spiritual master's appearance day? You don't have any understanding? He said, this is a disgrace. He said, tomorrow we will celebrate it properly. He walked out the door. The whole temple room full of guests. Everybody was like a cold ice pick had been stabbed into their heart. So we were all devastated, and he called us over to his house that same day. He said, now I will tell you, and you must never forget for the rest of your life, this is the way you must celebrate, this Vyasa Puja. And he told us, say these prayers. You have the offering ready. The offering has to go on 1 minute before 12. It has to be on the altar at 12. The flowers have to be there for the Pushpanjali. You must stand, offer the spiritual master 3 times, bow down 3 times, say the Mangala Charanam prayers, say the prayers to the spiritual master, have homage. We didn't have any homages written either. You must have the homages written. Everything must be there. This is the way you must celebrate the appearance of the spiritual master. So Šrila Prabhupada was very, very strict with his disciples, but at the same time he was very kind. But once you became his disciple, it wasn't that he wasn't kind to you anymore, but he wanted to, he wanted you to be trained up in Krishna consciousness. He wanted, for your own benefit, for your own spiritual benefit, that you would know these right things to do and not be offensive by your ignorance. So the next day, Prabhupada came back to the temple again, and we celebrated exactly the way he wanted us to do it. He was pleased. He was pleased.
We're in his quarters in Los Angeles. And after Prabhupada would take breakfast in his quarters, I would bring his plates back to the servants' quarters, which were down the hall. And I would clean his plates from there and transfer all of the remaining prasadam to distribute. And I took the orange rinds that he had eaten, which was the very first piece of Mahaprasadam I ever had from Šrila Prabhupada back in August of '72, was an orange rind I had taken, and I ate the whole rind because it was Mahaprasadam. But now I was a servant, and I took the orange rind and I threw it into the can. I had a little trash can that I had in there. And I distributed the prasadam. And it was later on in the morning, I was beginning to prepare his lunch. I had my own little refrigerator there, a little 2-burner stove right in the servants' quarters. So I was getting everything ready. I was cutting vegetables. I had a little board. It was probably a 1x12 and about 4 foot long, and it was on 2 cinder blocks. This was the kitchen, and a 2-burner gas stove that had been disconnected, I guess, from gas heat that was in the room, and they connected a gas stove. So I was beginning to prepare his lunch, cutting vegetables. And Šrila Prabhupada, as he would do, many times he would go out of his room like in the morning, late morning, and he would walk back and forth in his quarters there and chant. And so he was passing through the hallway. So he walked by and he saw me cutting vegetables, and he saw the orange rind in the trash can. Well, that was it. He just jumped all over me, just kept saying that. He said, what is this? He said, this moochie thing, he said, you have sitting there in the can. He said, you are preparing lunch, he said, for the deities, and you have in the can eaten orange. And I didn't have time, could not say anything. And there's one thing I never did was say anything to Šrila Prabhupada when he was yelling at me. And he said, do they do this down in the deity kitchen? He said, they have garbage in the can, he said, and at the same time they're preparing for the deity? Do they do that downstairs? I said, no, Šrila Prabhupada. So, but you were doing it up here? He said, you were so moochy. He said, and he kept saying over and over again, he said, you were so moochy. He said, you were a malecha. He said, how can you do this? So anyway, this went on for approximately 5 minutes. And it wasn't at this time, but a later time where Prabhupada was he was arguing with me. And he said, he would say that, he would say, so why do you do this? And I would say, I'm just a fool. And at the one time he said to me, he said, you are no fun, he said, to argue with. He said, because you never fight back.
They were doing a fire jagga in, I think it was Vrindavan temple or something, some temple, Šrila Prabhupada. The temple had already been established, but they were doing a fire jagga. And one of these, I think it was one of Šrila Prabhupada's godbrothers, it was in the middle of the fire jagga, and he leaned over to Prabhupada and he said, Šrila Prabhupada, they're doing it all wrong, they're doing it all wrong. And Prabhupada leaned back and he looked at him very calmly and he said, that's all right, they're just practicing.
And we were taking an interior flight on Air India, and we got on the plane, and while everyone was getting seated, we were sitting down, and they had the music very loud. It was Indian classical music, sitar and tabla. And I'm sitting down, and Prabhupada's sitting next to me, and he said, so, he said, do you like this music? And I just looked at him, and I thought, this is a trick question or something. It's like, because I mean, it was nice music, and I thought, but this is not Krishna conscious music, this is Maya, you know. So I just stopped, and I didn't say, and I didn't even answer him. I just didn't have the ability to answer him, because I hated to be wrong. You know, this was part of my difficulty. I could never answer honestly, because I didn't want to say the wrong thing. And so finally he said, this is very nice music. He said, then of course I was, yes, Šrila Prabhupada, this is very nice music. But I didn't want to be in that position of saying the wrong thing. And that's probably why I didn't say too much while I was with Šrila Prabhupada.
Prabhupada was very sick in Vrindavan, and that time our party was traveling in North India. In fact, we were in Badrikashram when we heard Prabhupada was getting more sick. We rushed back to Vrindavan, and soon upon our arrival there, we were allowed to go into his quarters for darshan. So we spent quite some time with him. He was lying on bed for months. He was already on the bed. But he seemed to be very enthusiastic to hear the Sankirtan reports, and he was inquiring, so which book is selling the most, and what is your daily collection? He was making all these inquiries. As we had just returned from Badrikashram, in a humorous way, I mentioned to Prabhupada that Srila Prabhupada, we presented your Bhagavad Gita as it is to Srila Vyasadeva. Because in Badrikashram there's a cave of Srila Vyasadeva, and he is supposed to be residing there. So we had visited the cave. Of course, we did not see him. We were carrying Bhagavad Gita, and we imagined that Srila Vyasadeva saw it. So we said, we presented your Bhagavad Gita to Srila Vyasadeva. Prabhupada was pleased to hear that.
On so many occasions, Prabhupada gave me things. One in particular I can remember was very funny. Was after I was married and had a child, and I became Prabhupada's servant. I was traveling with him. So my son now, Mayapur Chandra Das, was about 6 months old, and we were in Los Angeles. And Prabhupada called me in his room, and he said, call Nanda Kumar, I want to see him. So I went and I found him. He was in the community. And a few minutes later we came back, and we both went into the room and paid our obeisances, and Nanda Kumar came in. So I was about to get up and leave. He said, no, he said, sit down, he said. So he said, get me my white bag. So Prabhupada's white bag, this of course is something else that was very special. When Prabhupada traveled, he had his luggage, and we had our luggage, and then he had his white bag. Well, Prabhupada's white bag is where he kept all his very important effects, whether they be bank books for Bhaktivedanta Book Trust, Mayapur Vrindavan Trust, his personal effects, everything that was on his desk, his pens, that were given to him. He might have a gold cross pen given by a disciple, his tilak mirror container, his silver. So that was all in this bag. And some money that he would keep. Sometimes he would always keep just a little bit of money with him. And he said, so get me this white bag. So I got the white bag and I brought it back into his room. We were sitting there, and he went into his white bag and he took out a $50 bill and he gave it to Nanda Kumar, and he took out another one and he gave it to me. He said, these are for your children, he said. And Nanda Kumar immediately, of course, objected. No, Šrila Prabhupada. He said, I can't take this from you. And Prabhupada said, it's not for you. He said, it's for your son. Immediately stopped the objection, which Prabhupada was very good at. If he wanted to stop an objection from someone, he could stop it very quickly.
One time there was a little boy who came up to Šrila Prabhupada to get a flower. And there's a famous picture, and the little boy is standing there, and he's a little boy, he's about 5 or maybe younger, and he had a little shaved head with a seeker and everything. His name was Janaka. He was in Australia. And Prabhupada wouldn't let the flower go. He had the flower there in his hand, and the boy came to get the flower, and Prabhupada wouldn't let the flower go. And the boy had the flower, and Prabhupada had the flower, and the boy realized that everybody was looking at him, and he didn't know what to do. Should he just release his grip and go? He wanted the flower, but he didn't know if he should grab it. And Prabhupada knew that, and he was holding it, and he was watching that boy, and this very playful grin on his face. And so he eventually gave the boy the flower, but it was just a playful little incident.
I was massaging him. This was in Bhaktivedanta Manor. And for some reason we would always have a bottle of mustard oil and it was always one of those little aluminum tins of sandalwood oil, which he would use sandalwood oil on his head for massage. Unless he was ill, then there was no cold oil applied to his head. And then mustard oil on the rest of his body. And he would sometimes, during massage, he would put the lid back on the oil, on the mustard oil. So this particular day, I was sitting behind him, and I was rubbing his head with sandalwood oil. And after finishing his head, then I was doing that. We were alone in the room. I was massaging his back, and massaged his back with the mustard oil, of course, which was now in the bottle, which I didn't put the lid back on because it was not a problem. Anyway, I got up from his back and proceeded to move around to his side, and I knocked the bottle of mustard oil over on the floor. So immediately he turns around and sees, and he said, why didn't you have the lid on the mustard oil? He said, you're so foolish. He said, you will be intelligent when you're 80, he said to me. And he said, get a cup. So I ran into the next room and I got a cup, and both Prabhupada and I, now this was a little bottle of mustard oil, and we got the mustard oil, we would putting it on our hands and scraping it into the cup. Scraping until we got basically all the oil up on the floor. He said, now use that oil, he said, on my body. Because Prabhupada, this was another quality, never ever waste, never ever waste anything. Whatever you use, whatever you take, you use it. Whatever prasadam you take, you finish it. That was always. So he had me do that. So then I was there and I was massaging his arm, and this was my, I did have some sense of humor with Prabhupada, and we would, I would joke with him on occasion, but this one, it was just an opportunity, and whatever I said to Srila Prabhupada, I would think about once, think about it twice, 3, 4 times before I would say something. So a few minutes went by and I'm massaging Prabhupada, and he's very quiet. He just got done yelling, and he's very quiet with me, and I'm very quiet, and I'm thinking. So finally, I massaging his arm and rubbing, and I said, Srila Prabhupada, I said, thank you so much. I said, I thought it would take a lot longer than that. And he cracked up laughing, and it just everything. It was so funny. You know, he found it very amusing, you know. I said, I thought it would take so many more. I said, I thought it would take so much longer, I said, to become intelligent. So he was real pleased with that, you know, that was funny.
This quality of compassion is the thing that distinguished Srila Prabhupada from everyone else. He was totally compassionate. I think the quote is Paraduka Duki, the person who is so compassionate. That's the quality of the greatest devotee. No one is insignificant, and no one was insignificant to Srila Prabhupada. One devotee once said about his father, he said, "Oh, his is my father," you know, and he said, "But he's not a devotee, but he's all right." And Prabhupada said, "No, a good fruit doesn't come from a bad seed." So in this way, the man felt so good about his son being a disciple of Srila Prabhupada because he was complimenting him in such a nice way. He didn't think anybody was insignificant. In that temple that we had in La Cienega Boulevard, some of these old ladies would come from the neighborhood. And they would come, and they were so old, they would have those old lady kind of shoes, you know, that laced up. And Srila Prabhupada said, they don't have to take their shoes off. And then Prabhupada said, put some chairs up in the back of the temple. And he let them sit up in the back of the temple with these chairs. And they would listen to Srila Prabhupada speak, and the devotees would have kirtan. And Srila Prabhupada he started the practice of circumambulating the temple from the inside, a big long circle, you know, of all devotees. So he would come back to the back of the temple, and he raised his hands up in front of those old ladies and said, "Hare Krishna!" And the old ladies jumped up out of their chairs with their canes, you know, and their little old lady shoes and little spectacles, and they said, "Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna." And they would sit back down again. Prabhupada would go around and lift his hands up, "Hare Krishna." And they would sit up again, perk up, and chant Hare Krishna. And he would make sure that they would get their prasadam and everything at that time. So Prabhupada's compassion was there for everybody. He was not saying anybody is insignificant. You know, everybody was a child of God in Prabhupada's eyes, and everybody had the right to go back to home, back to Godhead, no matter what situation they were in. And some people were closer to getting there, and some people were not so close. You know, but comparatively speaking, we're all thousands and millions of miles away.
Prabhupada, he would be told on so many occasions, you know, devotees would come up and say, this devotee is doing something, or this devotee is not chanting his rounds, he is temple president. And never would you hear Prabhupada say then he should be removed. You know, he would say, well, perhaps he is so busy, he does not have time to chant his rounds. It was so interesting because Prabhupada would lecture on the Vyasa-san, and in his writings, in his books, there was always very strict. You know, one must follow the 4 regulative principles, one must chant their 16 rounds, and that was it. And one must be fully engaged in Krishna service. But as soon as he would be in his quarters and there was some difficulty, then there was nothing but compassion. You've done so much service, you know, see how you can take care of this. You just try, he would say, chant your rounds. And you know, we will see what we can do. There was always an arrangement to be made. He would never reject someone because of a fall down, you know, breaking one of the regulative principles. There was always something we can try to work it out. Of course, if someone said something about the philosophy, then there was instant, that was very bad. You know, immediately he was gone. But for a fall down, for Prabhupada, this was to be expected, he would say. Once also here in Los Angeles, he said, if it was not, he said, for the chanting of the Maha Mantra, he said, you boys and girls could not do anything. He'd say, in the West, he said, you have so much drug use. He said, you could not accomplish anything, he said, except for the chanting of Hare Krishna. He said, it has enabled you to get all these temples, to get all these devotees. He said, it's simply by Krishna's mercy in the chanting.
Well, Srila Prabhupada was to our apparent limited vision, his health was deteriorating, and he requested that I come to India, to Vrindavan, to see him. So I just got married, and my wife was pregnant with my first son. So I couldn't leave, and we were living in a very remote part of Hawaii. So I couldn't leave at that particular moment. But I promised that as soon as my wife had her baby, then I would come. So time passed after my son arrived, and Shirikirti came over to Maui from Oahu, and we flew off to India together. So at that time I wasn't living at a temple, so I let my hair grow a little bit longer than I should have. And when we arrived in Delhi, I thought, well, I can't go to see Šrila Prabhupada like that, so we shaved up and had this big long sika. And Šrila Prabhupada, when I walked in the room, it was a very sober mood, dark, and everything was subdued, and people were kind of morose, not making too much sound and everything. So I walked into Šrila Prabhupada's room, and they said, "Oh, Šrila Prabhupada Madhavisa has arrived." So Prabhupada sat up in his bed, and I paid my obeisances, and Prabhupada, first thing he said, "Whoa, look at Madhavisa. He's maintaining such a nice sika." And he chuckled like that, knowing that, I hadn't maintained such a nice sika. I just had shaved up in Delhi train station. And the second thing he said, "Where is your wife?" See, I had left Šrila Prabhupada, I was a sannyasi, and then I had left and got married and everything like that. So that's not particularly the way you should do it. But Šrila Prabhupada, he just shrugged that off. It was like immaterial to him. He wanted to know where my wife was. Not that, why have you got married? Why have you done this? He wanted to know, where is she? And he was fully aware that I was married and I had a child and everything like that, and he wanted to see her. And I said, well, Šrila Prabhupada, she just had her first baby and she really doesn't want to travel. And she said, that's right, she shouldn't travel. But she is feeling okay? And I said, yes, she's feeling good. And you had a son? And I said, yes, Prabhupada, I had a son. And I said, and I named him Abhay Charan. Is that all right? And he said, yes. He said, that is okay. You've named him after your spiritual master. And then he went on to explain the famous purport that's in the Srimad Bhagavatam about the elephant and the crocodile. That the elephant is very mighty and very strong, but when he enters into the water, he becomes victimized by the crocodile because he's not in his proper atmosphere. If he's on the dry land, he can annihilate, he can crush the crocodile, but because he's in the water, he's at the mercy of the crocodile. So he said, similarly, we may be situated in the wrong atmosphere for executing Krishna consciousness. We must put ourselves in the right atmosphere, and then we can execute our Krishna consciousness and with all strength and vigor. So he said, it doesn't make any difference. You are a sannyasi, now you're a householder. That doesn't make any difference. The proper thing is just to go on with your Krishna consciousness, execute it. If you can't execute it, if you're becoming weak by artificially embracing a sannyas order, and you must take another order to become strong again, that is all right. But the most important thing is don't leave the association of the devotees and continue on with your Krishna consciousness. And he made me feel so good, and it was very enlivening and personal to be with Šrila Prabhupada in those last days.
Sangsara dava nandalira lokam Pranaya karina ghana ghanatyam Sapta sakalyana gunarnavasya Bandi gurasi charan